Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the NordSync online seminar number 11. Today we're talking about artistic identity and creating a contemporary ensemble from scratch. My name is Stefan Froloff, and I'll just say a couple of words for those of you who are first time with us, what NordSync is and what we're doing here this beautiful morning on Saturday, Easter holiday. So NordSync project stands for Nordic Synchronization Project, which sort of represents our goal in doing everything we can in bringing the Nordics closer together. There is no politics in that. We're just talking about people living in our countries, learning more about each other's culture, and hopefully making this world a little bit better. And the point of online seminars is that we invite two guests, two artists or two ensembles to talk about their projects and ask them about what they think about culture and music in general nowadays. And today we have two guests. It is Sander Tingstad from Norway, who's a violinist, and a new ensemble just formed in Stockholm called KlangFabriken, represented by Theo Hilberg and Sofia Kolopov. I want to say a special thanks to Sander, who jumped in today's stream by a very short notice yesterday night, which is really cool. And with no further noise, let's just go to it. And I was thinking maybe, Sander, you would start with a couple of words about yourself, and I hope you will tell us about your artistic virksomhet and what you are doing and busy with right now.
Yes, thank you very much. Very glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, so I'm a classical violinist who have been working a lot in different genres and across different genres, and I've always been concerned about and interested in lots of different types of music. And I've been playing a lot of folk music. So I started out in Lillehammer Kulturskole and been trained as a classical violinist and also playing folk music from Gudbrandsdalen, particularly where I'm from Lillehammer. So Gudbrandsdalen has been my main folk music tradition. And then for the last few years, I've been working in the Arctic Philharmonic in Tromsø as a violinist, and then doing some of my own projects with the orchestra and outside of the orchestra, and particularly with Norwegian folk music and classical music. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about an album that I released 4 years ago that I know that you have listened to, Stefan. And like I said, I've always been interested in lots of different types of music and kind of what makes different kinds of music unique. And coming from both the folk music world and the classical world, I'd always been listening to Norwegian classical music with a bit of a like, why are we not bringing more of the folk musical playing style into this? So it started with in my master's, I decided to do a project with playing Norwegian classical repertoire and bring in the folk musical style of playing. Yeah, in the album, I work with 4 different pieces, 4 different projects. And maybe the most interesting to me is the Grieg Sonate for violin and piano, where I think Grieg is interesting because there is so much folk music there in his music. And to me, it's always been very obvious a lot of the things that are like just very much inspired by and very much in the language of folk music, but it's still normally played in a very, very romantic, kind of modern romantic way. So I asked the wonderful pianist Ingfrid Breie Nyhus she's actually done a PhD on the topic of folk music versus classical music. I asked her to join me, and we started exploring to play Grieg as folk music. And when we started this process, I kind of found more folk music than I expected, even in Grieg. That when you start to explore to play it in a different way, I just had so many ideas coming up. And then it was a huge process to kind of make it into a finished product, so to say, to actually make a whole interpretation that would work, because you have a lot of elements that are very folk musical, and you have a lot of elements that are very classical, romantic. And we would start out by trying to really just play it as folk music, which would work very well in some sections, and then suddenly sounding kind of strange because you get to these big romantic parts with lots of kind of emotions and big chords, and if you don't bring that out, so to say, it sounds strange. And yeah, it was a long process to kind of put this all together.
Just wanted to give a little disclaimer for those of our listeners who are not into classical music, because we also
Yeah.
have like people from the arts, from visual
Mm.
arts, painters, people working with literature. The Grieg Sonata we are talking about, it's number 2, right? The G minor, yes. It's one of 3 he wrote, and all 3 are like the super duper classical repertoire. Everyone in the world of this caliber of musicians, they all played, and everyone knows this. No, not really. No.
Apparently, in the UK, we had to play Elgar and stuff like that.
I don't know. I thought Grieg is very big. At least like
at least in Norway,
Apologies.
all violinists know this music. All classical violinists in Norway will have played this
when
piece.
I was little, starting in Russia, it was like you must play. It's like Brahms sonatas.
Yeah.
Maybe even more popular actually, because they are so romantic in their like essence. Anyway, and point being is that there is sort of kind of a tradition in the world how it's supposed to be played. A very like
very
romantic,
much so.
Very because it is a brilliant romantic music. It kind of represents the national romanticism in the culture of Norway, I suppose, as many of those famous paintings. And then what you're doing in this album is like you're reinventing it, sort of, for people who are not so much aware of the Norwegian folk traditions. That sounds very fresh. And I had this fantastic experience. Luckily, the only sonata I haven't played of Grieg was exactly this one. So for me, when I opened it and I couldn't, notes by heart, I didn't hear anything like you added. It sounds completely natural, as if it was ever written like that, always written like that. And it sounds very much like folk improvisation, but with piano, which added this kind of academical flair. So it's a great combo. I really I don't want to
Thank you.
Go too much into this, but I actually do want to do a lot of thanks to you for bringing this up, because I think it's very fresh and I haven't heard anything like that before. And my thinking was that it is also a very like Norwegian product, just an idea of like totally revisiting the very popular classical piece in a kind of very unique and very like it's very authentic and very honest in all possible ways. So it was really a pleasure to hear. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background more. So because not everyone, I assume, understands what it means to be growing up in Lillehammer and being exposed to the folk culture. Can you say a little bit about your experiences as a child? Because probably that was the time when you were first exposed to that.
Absolutely. So, yeah, like I said, I started playing music early on, and I was always interested in a lot of different genres, but started learning the violin the kind of classical way, and then I started out playing in what we call a spellemannslag. I'm not sure how to translate the spellemannslag, but a group of players coming together to play folk music, and you learn, as opposed to in the classical tradition, you learn just by listening and playing. It's the oral tradition. So there are, of course, tunes being written down, but mostly you learn just passing from one person to the other. So I played for some years in smaller groups where we would learn tunes this way. The teacher kind of played the tune and we copy and you learn, which I think is really a wonderful way of learning music, where you pick up on a lot of things that you can't really write down. And then I had a few years where I went to a private teacher called Kristen Odde. He is a wonderful fiddle player who's part of like one of the families in Gudbrandsdalen that's just like generations of folk musicians, where my impression is that everyone in the family plays music. His nephew, the nephew of my teacher, is also playing in my album. He's the accordionist player in my album Opphav. So I learned to play. We were sitting in my home and he was playing tunes and I was copying, and that's how I really felt I learned the folk tradition a little more properly with him.
Fascinating, really, really cool. And the second part of the album where you actually play with accordion, I was very interested in how do you, because it's slightly I'm sorry for that, slightly off the tuning, like it's obviously intentional, it's a tradition thing, but how does that work? This is like a quart tonal intonation or something like that. Is it something entirely you learn by ear, or it's something how?
Yeah, this is something you learn by ear in the folk music world. So, I mean, I can go to one of the other pieces, which is the 6 old village songs from Lom by Sparre Olsen, where I play with Mats Erik Odde, who is the nephew of my old teacher, and he's a folk musician from Lom in Gudbrandsdalen. And these songs that we play on this album are traditional songs from Gudbrandsdalen, which was collected by the Norwegian composer Sparre Olsen, and he wrote pieces based on these. But when I started, this is also very like standard repertoire for violinists in Norway. Everyone knows these songs, but the way they're played again is very much like romantic kind of style. And I found a folk singer who could sing these songs for me as they are sung traditionally. She was called Jarnfrid Kjøk. And when she sings them, it's a very rich tonality, and you have these notes that are in between, right? So intentionally out of tune, you could say. And this is part of the tradition, and I think for those who learn it orally, they don't think about like it being outside what is normal, or it's just the way they sing it, which is close to kind of anyway, it's the way that it is done. So I just tried to copy her way of singing these tunes. And again, what is interesting to me is kind of what is unique with different types of music. And these are wonderful melodies if you play them kind of more in the romantic style and all of that. But you kind of lose, I think, what is unique with them in terms of you have rhythm and tonality, and it's very, very special melodies with a very special expression. And when you go back to the more traditional way of performing it with also the intonation, then you get a very unique expression.
Yes.
I have a question about the intonation. When you play with microtones, are you using them as an ornament, or are you choosing that for this one song we will play this scale, and this scale contains like a blue note, and it's like more like a mode?
It's a bit of both, I think. In the piece where I play these like traditional folk songs made into classical composition, it's more like a scale that has like certain notes that are, but it also, yeah, it actually varies. Sometimes in one part of the melody, a note is, it's not a completely fixed scale, so it's just kind of the way that they do the melody.
Sometimes an expression too. Sort
Yeah.
of. Yeah.
Mm.
But
And in classical music, we often operate with like quarter tones, which is like exactly in the middle between the half note that is the normal scale. So just one. But in the folk music world, it's just like it's not really an exact quarter tone. It's like a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but very, very specific. You can hear the performers doing the exact same intonation every time without necessarily knowing mathematically, what note it is. So it's with the oral tradition, you just get a very strong expression and you pick up on very fine details with the way you learn it, I think.
very, very exciting. I wanted to ask you a little bit because this album is like 5 years old, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's approximately the same time as the Danish string quartet with their woodworks, and also I think Sister Hemsings, they also started doing a lot. They kind of gained a little bit of popularity with bringing folk music into, or Nordic folk music into classical music world. Do you find it's like it's a trend nowadays? And the question to Sophia and Theo, is it like trend only in Norway, Denmark, or it's also Sweden and maybe the rest of the Europe? Maybe Sander first.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it is. It is an interest for this, and I think that the classical world is kind of opening up a little bit to being much more open than I feel it was when we were studying. I feel already it's since then it's a difference that the classical world is more open to other styles and influences and crossover projects, and the folk music has something very special to me. I think, yeah, like I said, with the oral traditions, that they have something very valuable musical qualities. So I think, yeah, there is a lot of interest around that.
But do you think it's like an interest that brings those this albums out, or it's more like we musicians are interested in that and we are giving this tillbud, we are coming with this approach? Is it like a pressure from below, or it's coming from above?
I think it's both. In Norway, it's also folk music in general. Folk music and folk dance is popular.
Yeah.
And for me, what I also just want to say is that like I've done this album, and then I've done a lot of various projects with exploring bringing folk music into the classical world. And we have done, you mentioned the Danish String Quartet. We have done their arrangements in the Arctic Phil, where I work, Arctic Philharmonic in Tromsø Orchestra. Where we have played folk music arrangements in the full orchestra. And I've also written some arrangements myself and pieces that we play. And the response that you get from the audience when you play folk music is something different. It's just like very engaging on an intuitive, direct way, just like right away. It's catchy.
Yeah.
And I feel also when you combine, because classical musicians, we are we have studied for a lot of years and operate on a high level. But playing folk music is surprisingly difficult when you are supposed to like do it properly, to get the style, to really get the expression that you want. It's challenging technically, even though it's like simple tunes to play in one way, but to get the style it's like a really different technique. But when you combine this, the rhythms and the schwung and the drive and everything from the folk music with the classical, everything that we do well, and lift it up and like play folk music in kind of symphonic orchestra, and you just get a very, very powerful music combination. And that's kind of what really inspires me, that you see that also the audience react to this instantly when you get the qualities kind of from both worlds.
Yeah. Sophia, Theo, is it something similar? Is there any similar trends in Sweden when it comes to folk music?
I think there definitely are, and I couldn't agree more with Sander about this thing being something that playing folk music or finding new ways is a way to engage with the audience and bring people together. And I think this is maybe one factor that has made it very big in Sweden. And of course, there's a long tradition in Sweden, certainly, about how to blend folk music with different genres. There's an old album called Jazz på svenska, which is piano and double bass folk music in a jazz context. It's a very, very popular album with Jan Johansson and Georg Riedel. And then later on we have composers like Karin Renqvist, who has done so much to bring folk music to the contemporary art music setting. But these things are more, I mean, what I think now is that there's even a newer approach to how can we think of folk music and how can we blend it together and merge it together with other genres. And I think that in Sweden there's a lot with our choral tradition, and the singing tradition of folk music is very much in focus, and people are exploring how to create this very special way of singing, both as a soloist singer but also as a choir, and also in other settings like electronics and folk music is I've seen many concerts and many a lot of people using that, but I think it's very interesting how folk music can be so organic. And I guess that's maybe the point also, but that it is organic and very flexible and dynamic, and you can use it in a lot of senses. And it brings me actually to a question that I had for Sander about, because this album and your playing has been with the Grieg sonatas, and it's been quite small chamber music settings, from what I understand. How do you think? You talked a bit about folk music and orchestra, and I was curious about how do you think it goes into folk music and orchestra playing? How does those two interact?
Yeah, so we have done a project in the Arctic Philharmonic with a dance group called Kartelle, which works with Norwegian folk dance. And we have made a show where we play arrangements by folk music from northern Norway with a dance show with dancers. So here it's really, very much based on the folk music traditions, with traditional music, with dancers. So you actually need to get the right feel of the music for it to be good dance music, which most folk music is in the beginning dance music. So the rhythm and the style and everything is really important. So I have been leading this project musically, and we have been working a lot with incorporating the playing style. And that's what I feel. There are a lot of people looking at folk music and bringing that and combining folk music and classical, but not so often going really deep into the actual playing style, which is, like I said, a very different way of playing, a very different way of using your bow that creates the rhythm, that creates the groove, and the drive and the expression and everything. And we spent quite a lot of time working on that. To really, because you need some time to make classical musicians actually get the difference in sound and everything.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah,
you
I
do
mean,
that, I think it's very powerful.
I was one of those classical musicians who is in love with the Danish string quartet Woodworks album. So I did an attempt
Yeah.
on doing that with my quartet, and I can confirm that getting all the melisms and all the stuff with bow, it took us longer than Haydn on the same concert.
Yeah.
Was
Can I add just a
good.
tiny bit to this thing about the scene in Sweden and folk music? I've noticed that like there's a lot of individual artists who are doing really interesting stuff with folk, but I've not really seen like big orchestras. I've been working now for a few years with the radio orchestra, and I cannot imagine trying to like do something like you described there. I mean, we play like Valflicans Dance, and this is maybe the by Alven, and this is the furthest it goes to folk. But then you look at like individual people who are making their own projects, like Sarah Parkman, for example, who's blending a kind of a lot more pop with folk, or like recently in Svensk Musikvård, Tusen Tungor were taking part. They're like a choral ensemble who have or like even Fanny Källström, who I think was at KMH the same time as us. She wrote a folk messa, from what I understand correctly. So it seems like there's a very big push towards this, but there's still kind of a barrier between the big machine of orchestras who it's just not their tradition, and it's a too big ensemble and too long tradition to be able to kind of break that frontier, I think.
Well, as we like to say in Norway, Sweden sometimes is a little bit behind on trends. But when they get it right, then they're unstoppable. Yeah.
I did hear that Sweden got the bicycle first.
Good point. I was curious, how are things with that in Great Britain, Sophia, since you spent some time there too?
I mean, I left the UK in 2019. I don't think anything has changed since then. I didn't experience really any folk. I grew up in a very classical environment. But in Great Britain, I think there's a very complex relationship with anything that is deemed to have national pride, because of course it has such a long colonial past that I think people are so afraid to be associated with that they've completely like erased or just forgotten their traditions. I mean, Cornwall was in the south was one of the last places that had its own unique language, and that's now the last speakers have died. There are places with dances. There are composers who took a lot of inspiration, like Vaughan Williams, who was writing down folk tunes, like Bartok was doing. But it's so niche, it seems, and it's so far away from the classical tradition that, especially growing up in London, London is so culturally diverse, and you could find a concert which is blending Nigerian music with classical tradition, like there's so much world influence, and people who studied ethnic musicology, as they used to call it. I hope they don't call it like this now, but that it feels like the English tradition was just somehow very embarrassing, and at least that's how I saw it. You don't want to be seen as a nationalist. You don't want to have the English flag in your window with the cross. It's somehow weird. So that unfortunately erased all of that.
But if you go outside England, there probably it's the opposite relations to that. I don't know, like somewhere in Wales or even further north. Is the national culture more in favor there then?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Wales has a huge singing tradition. Again, places that have like valleys, hills. It's a bit like in Western Ukraine where you have the Carpathians. They have a huge singing tradition. Ireland, Scotland, Northern Ireland, I mean, they all have a really big cultural identity because it's part of their resistance. Yeah, they have it. I mean, Scotland, look, it's like.
But do they mix the genres? Do they mix the classical genre, classical industry with this?
I think a lot more. I've seen quite a few groups, like for example, Baroque groups. I think in Ireland that mix kind of Irish folk and Baroque, or or like just classical stuff that looks a lot more like the Woodworks album. I've seen that happen. But yeah, it's almost always, from what I've seen in Scotland, in Ireland, in places that, in the UK, in like generally, it's a very weird place.
I see.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why I bring this thing up and talk about is that it's very often it comes very often as a very up-to-date theme to discuss in NordSync seminars because in NordSync we very often talk about interdisciplinary productions, the productions that would mix the different genre, different styles, and very often people we talk about very often as one of the tools to widen the audiences, to bring new people to our halls. And I was curious, that would be my next question to Sander, if you have experienced that this experiment of yours or this this project where you combine two different genres, did you feel like it added some audiences to you who would normally not maybe go to your classical music concert, but now since you incorporated with folk music, did you feel that you maybe attracted some more people who would normally go to the folk music concert but not the classical, and vice versa?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. There has been interest in this project from musicians in many different genres, and I think definitely from the folk music side, people have been who doesn't normally listen to classical music, they will listen to this, which is more a classical album still than a folk music album, and jazz musicians being interested. So yeah, that's kind of within the music environment. I feel that there's a broader interest, and then, like I said, with the qualities of the folk music, I think there are a lot of listeners that are maybe not used to listening to classical music that like intuitively maybe can be, I think it can attract a slightly different audience, since it's a more personal expression in a way.
I think if I can add to that, I think that it's important when we talk about audiences and what it's very easy to get stuck in, at least for me, get stuck in my own perspective as a musician, as a performing musician. And what would when I try to think of what does an audience want, why are they coming to a concert, I kind of look at it in a way as a performer, and it's very hard to actually think like an audience member, like a person going there to experience something. And sometimes, often, maybe it doesn't. I mean, when I go to a concert, Tchaikovsky violin concerto, fantastic, I will listen to it. It's this soloist, it's this conductor, it's da da da. But this is maybe not the way if we want to create a new audience. We want to make new people go to a concert hall. I think it's more about how do we think of the preconceptions about going to an orchestra hall, and using folk music or using another element, visual element or dance, or these things puts things in another perspective, I think, and an audience doesn't really know what to expect. And I think this is the most important thing actually when we want to make more people go to the concert hall, is to have people go with no expectations, in a way that they're completely open to whatever experience there is. And if they see it will be this symphony and it will be this concerto, it can be like a barrier. But if they see dance and or these other genres, then I think maybe they won't really know what it will be about, and so they get curious. And I think this is very important.
Yeah, it definitely adds one more reason for people to actually take a taxi and go to the concert house instead of just sitting home and listening to Spotify or whatever, because basically everything can be found on Spotify nowadays, and people are really in seek of some experiences. And That's definitely something that adds to it.
Yeah. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think the context and what we do outside of just playing the music is so important to reach audience groups. And I think with the folk music world, it's kind of the more informal settings where you just play some music in a bar and it's a relaxed atmosphere and coming and going. And this, whatever we can do to bring that aspect into classical performance, that it's not such like you're coming into hall and sitting down and you have to clap at the right time and all of that, you know, and add everything that you can add with lighting and visuals and dance and make it something more, I think, definitely. And in terms of what we're talking about with my project of like interpretation and playing in this style, like the average audience member won't care so much about all of these things. They're just coming to listen to good music. And I think it's always interesting to discuss, but at the end of the day, I really believe that you have to do something that is genuine and that you believe in and that you are excited about. And if you are excited about your music and you do something that comes from you, the audience will feel that. So everything else is in a way a little bit secondary. I'm just reading a book by Rick Rubin called The Creative Act, where he writes a lot about this with creativity and emphasizes that like trying to do something for the audience is the wrong approach, that you should do something for yourself. If you are really, really excited about something and finding your way into something, then that's the way to go in terms of creating art. And I think that's a very interesting point.
Very exciting. What do you guys think about what's first, audience or the performer? Theo, Sophia. I think it's a big field for discussion, actually.
I had a big gut reaction when you described about the like excitement you feel, and I realized that I find it so obvious when people are doing things that's not coming from them, and it might not be that they're trying to be fake. It might just be that you've been forced. We grew up in this classical tradition where you were told what to do, and then suddenly you're in your mid-20s and you have a crisis because you don't know who you are and what your creative identity is. But I think it doesn't help that everyone these days has social media, everyone has a way to compare, everyone has a certain format they want to adhere to, and it's so like you feel it when someone's doing something that's, I find even when you're like within playing, that they're playing something that's either correct or that's they do an emotional thing, and it's like I don't buy it. And suddenly when it comes from a place that's really genuine, I can feel I leave the hall like completely moved in the totally different way. That maybe that's just more interpretation and not programming or approach, but I agree with you that if you start thinking so much about how to please someone, you'll go crazy, and nothing will be genuine.
Yeah, I agree with Sophia. I also think it's worth discussing that kind of dichotomy, the audience on one side and the orchestra or performer on the other side, where we're at the same time in all of the other discussions that we've had so far, we talk about genres crossing over, we talk about we're all part of this, we bring the audience together, but we're also in fact bringing the audience together with the orchestra or the ensemble or the soloist. And so I think also it could be helpful to think of it as we are all part of this room together, and we have different functions, and we are doing something. We need the audience to perform, and they need us to experience the performance. So we're in this kind of weird symbiosis that I think could be worth just thinking about.
Yes, exciting. I have a couple of more questions here which I want to address. So far we have time. And you mentioned, Sander, that the folk music community kind of reacted with interest, and like you felt a very positive feedback. How did the Classical Music Society and your friends from the classical music world reacted on the album?
Very much the same with interest. I mean, just to also explain, like you touched upon it, how different this actually is to do. Like there is a very strong tradition on how to play Grieg sonata. Like I would say everyone plays in more or less the same way. And when I played this first in my exam concert, one of the jury members, he almost fell off his chair when I started playing. Because like he was very shocked about this whole thing.
We can do it after.
We'll leave out the names. But he was supposed to give some feedback after, and he was a bit speechless because this was so new to him. And to me that also just like shows a little bit how stuck we are in a way, I think. I mean, all respect for all the wonderful classical musicians out there, but we have this like very strong traditions that we're not even quite aware of. And with Grieg, it's like we think we play what it says in the music, but it actually says very little in the score. And if you listen to how Grieg plays his own music, it's very different from how we normally play. So we had this idea that we play Grieg in like the way it's supposed to be played, or something like that. And then I've gotten feedback from some classical musicians working with like early romantic interpretation to try to go back and play Grieg how Grieg would have played it, how they would play Grieg at his time. And Are Sandbakken, for example, at NMH, who's a professor in chamber music at the Academy of Music in Oslo, who works a lot with this, he really likes my Grieg interpretation and think it's a lot closer to the way Grieg was played at his time, even though I'm doing something very different. But it has to do with the freedom of rhythm, the much more flexibility, much more in the moment, much more personal, and just not really sticking to trying to play the exact thing. So that's kind of been the reaction from the classical, and very much interest. Some people are a little bit shocked, but mostly people are just think it sounds very natural what I'm doing. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to a little comment, because for me it's kind of a little bit personal. For me, coming from a very like conservative classical music environment, being educated first years of my life in Russia, and that's exactly the story when you are told how to play from A to B, and one step left doesn't really apply. And I was curious if. Because many years ago I heard a conversation of a very famous Russian movie director who made a career in Hollywood. Not so big, but still he was working there. And he was mentioning that it's very problematic when you're growing up in an environment where people are telling you from A to B what to do and how to do. And he was actually giving example of Scandinavia and Norway in particular, that Norwegian movie directors are doing some impossible for the rest of the world things, because they are used. Somehow it comes from the, I don't know, maybe it's air in Lillehammer or Lom, that gives you this opportunity to be brave, or not caring enough to just take a step and see things for entirely different way, entirely their way, and not being afraid or stressed of bringing it out as they see it. And that's what gives Norwegian cinematography nowadays, for example. We can see it with all those nominations to Oscars last couple of years, that it really plays out in a long run. That maybe is not as approved in the beginning by all the big mentors and masters who know how it should be done. But then in the long run, I think many would prefer this album to a millions copy of Grieg being played in attempt to copy someone playing it in the 60s. You know what I mean? Classical musicians know what I mean. You go Spotify and you, as you said, check Grieg sonatas being recorded last 10 years, and they are approximately the same. Just my interesting observation. I wanted to ask you actually, what do you think makes this kind of approach different in Norway? Why people are going for different things without being stressed of being judged or getting a bad feedback on the exam?
Well, it's a big question, a big topic. I think it goes into the whole culture. I do feel that in Norway, in the music tradition, it's a little bit more focused than other places on finding your own voice, and that people are a little bit more oriented to not just copy your teacher and all. It's not such a strict school in a way with how like you should do this, and like I do feel that other places it is a bit more of that tradition where the teacher is like controlling everything and is teaching you how to play like them in a way. So, but
I was thinking
yeah,
about in Sweden, as I mean, I've only been here 6-7 years. My impression, of course, is similar, that it's nowhere near as strict, the teaching, as my Polish, Ukrainian teachers I've had before. But I became very aware of this anti-individualist feeling, like you don't want to be too different, or this kind of Jante thing of you don't,
But that's a Swedish thing.
I mean, Theo, you're
that's
going to have
Norwegian thing too.
address this one, but to not stick out too much, or not be too much, because it's kind of just make people uncomfortable. And whether that's Norway found do you think like a good medium between that? Because I don't feel like I was told what to do once I moved here. I found a lot of freedom that my teachers let me do my thing, but I also felt that there are quite clear boundaries. Don't be too unique.
I think that can be a very Swedish thing. Like you have a lot of invisible barriers, and you have a lot of freedom, but these invisible barriers are still there in a way. But I also think that as a Nordic country, I think the Nordic countries have that in common, that we are kind of outside a big tradition. With Sweden, from what I know, doesn't really have a big violin school, or at least it's if we have one, then it's influenced by a German tradition or a Russian tradition, and these things we have in Europe. We have these really big and deeply rooted traditions about how to play the instrument, and what repertoire works with what way of teaching and interpretation and everything. And I think that this is something that has been tried to be implemented in Sweden for sure. But now we're in this position where we're actually kind of asking ourselves, okay, but what is the value of us trying to be like this tradition from this place, and what can we do? I think this is connected to the rise of folk music, or like trying to find new ways, that we're kind of also searching for a new type of identity that, I mean, would not be possible in Germany, or would not be possible in Russia, or would not be possible in France or Italy for the matter. So I think this is a unique and kind of new way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of truth in that. It was at least my experience when I moved to Norway 13 years ago, that it was much freer of tradition, because there was simply not so much of the classical violin tradition yet. But emerging stars from both Norway and Sweden nowadays are showing that the recipe is quite great, because it's cooking here. All the great young stars like Lotta Kovic, Dalen, I don't know, Tingstad in Norway. So it's like it's really giving its results right now, and I think it's very exciting for old countries in Europe, maybe to learn something from that, because you can teach how to put the fingers quickly on the fingerboard, but this with daring to implement something else, something your own, something that hasn't been done before. I think it's a challenge for many. Let's not go too generalizing here, but yeah, that might be.
Yeah, I think there's really like pros and cons with everything, you know, and obviously the like strong traditions elsewhere also have has its merits, you know, and there's a lot of wonderful teaching going on, and you learn so much through these strong traditions as well. But I think like we need to be able to have two thoughts in the head at the same time more, and like one does not exclude the other at all, and that we can open up and have the best from both worlds, because there's a lot to learn from the strong traditions, and then there's something great about being much more experimental, much more personal and open, I think.
I was just to round this up. You mentioned a little bit about you working with Tromsø, the Arctic Philharmonic Orchestra. Maybe you could just say a couple of things about the orchestra and their approach to audience, how they program, because they have quite unique programming patterns. I think they do many things other orchestras don't do. Example given already, this folk music they had. Can you just tell a little bit about your orchestra?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've been working in the wonderful Arctic Philharmonic for the last 5 years, and there it's a bit of a special orchestra, since it's a chamber orchestra based in Tromsø with only string players, and then there's a Sinfonietta in Bodø with a few string players and wind players, percussion, piano. So we have our separate projects in Tromsø and Bodø, and then we meet to play symphony orchestra. So just this structure gives a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different things. We do the full symphonic repertoire, we do chamber music, and we do a lot of things in different genres. And it's a very, very versatile orchestra that kind of does everything from the classical repertoire to collaborating with artists. And it's a new orchestra that is very open to experimenting and doing things. So we have done like the Rakve, the show that I mentioned that I'm leading with folk music and dancers, where also the musicians are moving around on stage. And we have done a lot of those kind of projects as well, speaking about reaching out to the audience. How do we actually make connection? And I think that's also something to explore a lot with loosening up, not just sitting down reading our music, but actually engaging, moving around, filling the room, using the space. And we have been working with various people, among them Kyrre Teksnes, which is a guy that I've been working with, who is like a movement expert, kind of calls himself, and works with like, what is actually stage presence? How do you walk into a room and grab everyone's attention just with like your energy, your body language, and how can we communicate on stage as musicians with the audience, with each other? How can we, use the space kind of like the way dancers and actors work to create experiences? So yeah, Arctic Philharmonic is doing a lot of different things musically and experimentally, and mostly, of course, a classical orchestra, but also a very exciting workplace, since we are doing so many different things. So yeah.
How was just always curious, how often do you get together, the Bodø and Tromsø parts? How many projects a year do you have together?
How many symphony orchestra projects do we actually have? I think maybe like 10 projects, 8 to 10, with the full orchestra.
That's
and
quite
then
long.
we have, yeah.
And then one half of the orchestra moves to another city for this period.
Yeah.
That's
It's a lot of traveling.
It's a lot of traveling. Yeah, a lot of hotel expenses also.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, exciting.
Yeah.
Yes, I think unfortunately, since our time is not unlimited, we go further. And now it's time for KlangFabriken to present, Theo, Sophia. And KlangFabriken, just to translate it shortly, means a sound factory for those who are listening to us.
Yeah.
Go on, guys.
Yeah, I can start. I think let's just do a presentation of ourselves, I think. So my name is Theo Hillberg, and I'm from Stockholm, from Sweden. And I started playing music when I was 5 or 6 years old. I started playing saxophone and classical saxophone at the elementary school where I went. I went to Lilla Akademin school in Stockholm, and music was really part of my life from that day and forward. And it was a very interesting time. It was I really tried to figure out also, now thinking back, I've tried to think of how do I want to be a musician? Do I want to be a musician already at an early age? And I remember when I was about 15 years old, then I kind of committed to continuing with music, but I was also very fascinated by a lot of other subjects. But then I continued with saxophone, and after high school, I went to Royal Academy of Music in London and to continue my studies. And when I was there, it was such a nice experience to be in another context, because then I had gone to the same school and basically had the same kind of friends and the same social environment for 13 years. And so being in a new context really I got a completely different perspective on what you can do as a musician, or what you want to do and what you want to become. And around that time, I started to think also about conducting, and I started to think about, I was kind of interested in, literature and all these humanistic subjects in the university. And then I decided to move back to Stockholm so that I could do both saxophone, but also do some university studies, because it was easier to do that in Stockholm than in London. And so I did that for a while, and then I applied for conducting and started conducting, and I'm now in my master's degree for orchestra conducting in Stockholm. But then I'm currently freelancing a lot as a saxophonist and also as a conductor. And the main focus has been orchestra, of course, both saxophone, but also conducting. But I played in a lot of ensembles as a saxophonist, and we have this contemporary ensemble in Stockholm called the Stockholm Saxophone Quartet, where I've been substituting a lot for the past years. And that was kind of my way into contemporary music, I would say. I mean, as a saxophonist, you're always faced with the problem or the thing that you're kind of in a special place. I mean, is there a thing called is there a classical saxophone school, and how big is that, and how do you put yourself? Do you play jazz music, and you have a lot of saxophone in Swedish folk music? How do you approach that, and where are you in the genre jungle? Because you're a very versatile and dynamic as when you play that instrument. And so I was always faced with that kind of question: where do I see myself? Where do I put myself? And I thought when I started conducting that this is a place where I can, for some reason, I really felt that in conducting I could really choose how I wanted to do stuff. I felt like you had a lot of labels attached to you as a saxophonist that I didn't really experience in the beginning as a conductor for some reason. And then I started conducting, and I thought it was really fun and really enjoyable. And then we started this ensemble. But that's a later topic. Maybe Sofia can talk a bit about herself.
Yeah. So I was born in London, and I moved to France when I was 4, and I started playing the violin there, like in a tiny little local conservatoire. And I decided at age 5 I wanted to be a musician. I was like, I'm going to be like Bach or something. I don't know why I thought Bach was the most famous guy and the coolest. I was a bit of a weird kid. So I started playing, and that was kind of it. And then I never questioned that I would be a musician, but I think I questioned what it meant to be a musician a lot. When I was 8, I moved back to London, and I had quite strict Ukrainian teacher there. And when I was 12, I remember I started going to these chamber music courses, and it just completely blew my mind. Like I arrived there, and we would be playing Haydn quartets, and the teacher would make us shout out loud all the different like modulations we were going through, and talk and make up rhetorical phrases to explain what the phrases meant. And then I would go back to my violin lessons, and it would be like, straight bow, why are you not vibrating every single note? And I had all these like conflicting things that just, but one of them feels like communicating to people, and the other one feels like some sort of sports regimen. And then I somehow gradually, throughout my teenage years, tried to find a way to merge the two together. And how can I bring this like exciting, amazing thing? Every summer I would go to these courses, and it would be the highlight of my year, and it would be like the one thing keeping me really in love with music. And then how do I bring that into actually my violin playing, and not just completely put a barrier between the two? And then when I was 18, I went to Royal College of Music in London, did a bachelor there in violin. And then I had a lot of debt, student debt, and frustration. I was just so tired of this oversaturated environment in London where so many people trying to do so many different things, and it feels like a battle to try and stand out and be unique. And I remember we had these seminars about how to sell yourself and promote yourself, and what is your USP, your unique selling point, and you must have an Instagram account. And I just thought, like, I can't be here anymore. It's not that it's bad information, but it feels like so much form and no substance really left. It's like, people, if you're really trying to come up with what your unique selling point is, and you don't know, like what you were saying, Sandra, what really makes you happy and what makes you like so driven, then maybe you should not be doing this if it's so difficult for you to come up with that idea. Anyway, I moved to Sweden kind of randomly because we had this project at Royal College with Chamber Orchestra of Europe, who would come, some members would come, and we'd do a collaborative orchestra project. And Mats Zetterqvist, who is the chamber music teacher at Edsberg, the chamber music school in Stockholm, he came to lead this project, and we played a Brahms symphony with no conductor, and he was leading it. And I was just like blown away how this is finally like the chamber music feeling I've been chasing all these years. And all these like depressed, stressed Royal College students who are such good students were like, so the bowing is free, and we kind of are responsible ourselves, and we can breathe like one organism. And I thought it was amazing. And I asked Mats, but do you teach somewhere? And he said, no, I don't teach violin. No, but I teach music. I teach only music and chamber music, no violin. But where? He said, you don't know it. It's a small school called Edsberg. And I'd just been Googling Edsberg that morning, like different schools in Germany and Finland and Sweden. I thought, what does Sweden have? Let me check. And when he said this, I thought, okay, it's a sign. I have to go. Like, it's serendipity. So then I just applied, and I moved to Sweden. And yeah, that was in 2019, before Brexit, luckily. So now I can stay here because I moved as a European, got my clause in, and
that was
managed
a good call.
Yeah.
Good timing. Yeah. Well, it's exciting. I hope our listeners who are not into violin playing will forgive us for that, but it's really fun. That's what happens when 3 violinists and a saxophonist meets on a Saturday morning.
It sounds like the start of a joke.
Either that. Either of them. Yes. Yeah, but it's exciting. And I remember we first met, Sophia, it was in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And I had a kind of listening to your story. I have a little bit like I'm coping with my feelings and stress at the time when I was on that course in in Astona in
Yeah.
Zurich, because it was a little bit my feelings and my thoughts at the time as well. Why are we doing this? Why do we play 6 hours a day on that mountain where we can't even go out? You know,
Yeah.
something about the Switzerland also as a country hosting a musical course that makes it a little bit off. I don't know what your memories about that course is, but mine is quite never again.
I think the partying, honestly, and the people I met were my favorite and most memorable thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I mean, people are fantastic, but yeah, it was very exciting. Yes. So maybe a couple of words about the KlangFabriken.
Yeah, I mean, originally it's interesting how we all came together, because I had, for the last 2 years or something, I was thinking, like, in the back of my head, like, it would be really fun to start an ensemble. It would be really fun to have an ensemble, to do projects, because I had a lot of ideas that about projects that I wanted to do, and it took quite a long time for me to understand what the projects were, what I really wanted to do with the project, because it can be a thematic idea, or it can be, I mean, the start of a project is very there are no rules to how a project idea forms, I would say. But then I started to think about, it would maybe be nice to start an ensemble, or at least be a small group of people to do music, and then maybe it can grow and be something bigger. And I also thought that it's been a long time since, at least in Stockholm, we have a lot of contemporary ensembles in Sweden, but there are quite few in our generation, I would say. And so I thought maybe this is could be interesting. And then I had these thoughts, and then randomly, me and Filip, I mean, we know each other. We go back, and I mean, we studied together. And Sophia, I think you studied also at the same time, right? Yeah. And so we studied together at KMH, but then we didn't talk a lot about forming an ensemble. But for some reason, me and Filip met, and we quickly realized that we had the same ideas and the same goal, basically, that we both wanted to have an ensemble. And then we started talking about, okay, it could be like this, or it could be like this. And then we started talking about what people do we think could be part of this ensemble. And we started thinking about Sophia, and we were like, this could be very interesting. And I think we reached out to you, and we had a small, like a meeting, like a pitch or something. You were on a train, and we had this meeting about forming an ensemble. And I thought it was nice. It was nice to talk about the ideas and the visions, and not being set on what it actually will become, but you talk of it more in a kind of abstract sense. And I think that's what really brought us together. And I mean,
especially because, I mean, we have Filip is a percussionist. He's a percussionist from Slovenia. So we have a percussion, violin, and conductor / saxophonist, and people look at us and say, "What music do you play? What do you do?"
My question exactly. What do you guys play?
But when you reached out to me, I immediately was like, "Yeah, that's it. I'm in," because I felt like I'd been trying to do this for such a long time, and I have so many ideas and so little structure, and so few people to keep me accountable and to actually help with things that are like, oh, maybe we need an accountant, or we need this, or this is how we do a rehearsal. And I have like my crazy notebooks full of ideas. Like, I have so many things I want to do. I have a lot of work as well on the side with Ukrainian music, and like performing and doing premieres of stuff that was forgotten. And that was also an amazing thing, that I can just come to Theo and Filip and say, hey, I'm going to put this symphony on. How do we do it? And then I have two sensible, they're like the dads, and they'll tell me, okay, this will work, or maybe this is not realistic.
Yeah.
And I think this is talking about that, what we play and what we do. I mean, the idea, from me at least, and from Sofia, I get it also, that it's the projects and the kind of ideas that we want to implement in a way. And that has been the founding kind of cornerstone, that we want to realize or do projects. Now, I think in this ensemble size, that has been, we had an idea that we wanted to be a set ensemble size. We want to have a string trio, piano, percussion, and woodwinds, clarinet, flute. It's the classic Pierrot Lunaire setting, and there's a lot of pieces written for this setting, with or without soloists. And then we also started to think about, okay, but maybe it could be fun if the ensemble is very flexible, that we have, it's more of a, depending on what project we're doing, we can have, it can be a string quintet, or it can be a woodwind quintet, or it can be both. It can be very flexible and try to work around what project are we actually doing. And I think that we had many ideas, and we really wanted to have like our first performance. And I mean, we had our first performance just a couple of weeks ago. It's I mean, this is a very fresh ensemble in that sense, a very new contemporary ensemble. And we reached out to Jörgen Pettersson, who is both member of the Stockholm Saxophone Quartet, but also a kind of organizer for a festival in Stockholm called the Svensk Musikvår, which is a Swedish spring music festival, like that. And he was super on board and really wanted to push us to do this performance, and really helped us a lot to be part of the festival. And then we did all the other work by ourselves, of course. But
what did you
it
play?
started. We played a lot of music, and I think this is also because when I got into this, when we started doing this ensemble, I thought it was so interesting how to, okay, but if we do this piece, then we can do this piece, this can lead to that. So I was trying to see like patterns, or I was trying to think of a bigger structure and not think only of the concert as that particular concert. And so our concert became this kind of smorgasbord performance, I would say.
It was 3 hours long in the end.
It was really long, but it was, we did... it was kind of two performances in one, because often, I mean, of course, founding a new ensemble, having the right budget or having the right amount of money to pay for all the expenses is really hard. And we found a composer who actually had got a lot of money to perform a piece, one of his pieces. And he needed an ensemble to perform that. And then we got connected, and we could do the performance. And then we met, there was a soloist involved who had ordered, or, it was her piece basically written for her, Dominique Hellsten. And she had also some pieces that she wanted to do. And we had some pieces that we wanted to do. And our goal was to play new music, basically. Mm-hmm. So we collaborated with 3 composers, Tove Kjettström, Anders Anneholm, and Zacharias Wolf, all studying or recently studied at the KMH in Stockholm, the Royal College of Music. And we asked them if they could do like small pieces, really, really small, maximum 3 minutes long pieces. And just so that it's some kind of taste of their personality or their way of playing or performing and composing. And now I think that we want to do something with these small pieces that they made, that we can elaborate on them. We can do, each of these small pieces can be its own performance or its own project, basically. And so that's the idea from now on. But yeah, a lot of commissions, and new music.
But what kind of besetting did you have? What
Yeah, we had a string trio, we had piano, percussion, and 2 woodwinds, and no saxophone this time. It was conducting, and soloists also, two singers, Alexandra Bischel and Dominique Hellsten.
Cool.
And
based in Stockholm, so it's like you use your network from Stockholm in order to play.
Basically, yeah, exactly. We had and our connections from people that we studied with during KMH. It was we had a flutist who is based in Budapest, but she was really happy to join for the concert, so she joined us.
And who in your gang is dealing with the finances?
Yes, I mean, I would say it's Filip has the most. He has taken up that responsibility. But I mean, since we are so new into this is still a question of how do we sort things out. I mean, for this concert, it was easy because then it was the composer David Thudén who had the money, and he was basically our employer. But as of now, we don't have a aktiebolag or company or this, and so we need to sort that out. And I think that we need a accountant, and all these things need to be
I mean, it's a big story starting, so you have a lot of help. How to sort it out legally. I don't know, Sander, were you playing in the Ensemble Allegria when they started, or are you still playing?
No,
you were not.
No, I have not played with them, actually.
I just wanted to give that as a very good example of something that starts as a student initiative and then evolves into something very, very big. Because I think now they are. I don't know if you've heard about them, Ensemble Allegria.
It's is it Nicolas Colon? No, it's Ticciati, right?
Not sure either, but they're like Oslo-based ex-NMH students ensemble, mostly strings. I think they're a chamber orchestra, classical one, right, Sander?
Yeah.
And they also started like with a focus on the modern music, one can say, samtidsmusik, wasn't it? Correct me, Sander, if I'm wrong. Anyways, and they are really big, and they have their own budgets, and they are doing a lot of very fascinating stuff. And I just, it would be a very good example, and maybe we invite someone from Ensemble Allegria next time. So follow us for next stream, and maybe it will be some good advices from their side how to develop and evolve things into. Because I think they have everything, like economy and everything, very well organized, and I think might be quite useful in sense of.
I think this is so it's so important as an ensemble or any group that you have these things sorted out, and also quite early, so that it doesn't become extra work in the end. And that you get to that we've talked about. Okay, how do you write? How do you write all these project applications, and how much time should all these things take as an ensemble? And should we hire someone who does that for us, or should we do it ourselves? And I mean, it's always a question of time and money. But I think that it's very important that it's very clear, at least, who does what and when and where. But I also, I mean, there's another ensemble, or I don't really know what to call it, but called Gränslandet, and I mean in Stockholm, which is kind of also a symphony orchestra sort of thing, and they're also. I mean, it has been going on for some years now, but it's also a quite well-functioning freelance-based project with a lot of interesting ideas. And I think that it's this. They are very good at reaching out to audiences, and finding new venues to play in, and finding new ways to explore music and do projects. And I think this is the good a very good thing, being a small ensemble, that you can really do a lot and do things that big institutions either doesn't want to do or doesn't have that they see that there's too much risk attached to it, maybe. And you can do it and they can see, this kind of works. And I think that is a very interesting environment to be in.
Since it's quite obvious that you guys are fond of modern academic music, I want to add a little bit of spice in that discussion and represent that other side of classical music world a little bit, who are a little bit skeptical about modern academic music. I mean this music which in Norwegian at least they call samtidsmusik. I think it's a term in Swedish as well, which is like particularly intellectual and at some points almost unrecognizable and sounds a lot like noise. What's your stance on that? What do you? How do you see a further development of that genre?
But I think it. I mean, there's definitely a period in music history where this is the important thing in writing music, the intellectual kind of way of thinking and listening to music. And I mean, I don't remember Milton Babbitt, I think, American old composer. He wrote this kind of article in the 60s about how his vision about a composer is this kind of a contemporary composer is a sort of academic person doing his research. The pieces are his research, and it's not meant to be for the greater audience, as quantum physics is not meant. I mean, these research reports are not meant to be for a greater audience. It's meant to be for a small group that are doing that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think that this is very connected to that period, and not so much anymore. Actually, it's a way of looking at music, but for me, it's important. The most important thing is how we use that music. I mean, the contemporary music for me is not necessarily a sound or a specific way of composing or notating. It's more of how you use it in what context. I think of it more as a contemporary thinking, I would say.
But
so there's
you can perform it for them, because that's kind of. I mean, I will explain myself a little bit clearer. I think a very cool example is like you can see how music developed in Schoenberg's pieces, for example. He started as a uber romantic, super duper cool late romantic composer in his Verklagtenacht, for example, and then towards the further in his works, when you come somewhere around his string quintet, for example, which makes a lot of sense when you have a score in front of you and you can relate it to his life. And I remember this fantastic lecture I was once at, where a music scientist really explained that these 3 notes, which doesn't make any sense, actually represent the death of his wife, and then those 12 notes later they represent the self. It sounds like a complete for me, a classical musician with 12 years, 20 years education, it does sound like a noise if I present it without the score. Of course, however, when I open the score and I mark myself those themes there, then it makes a lot of sense. But my question is if this kind of experience is still music experience, because in my maybe a little bit conservative point of view, music should be something that would be able to percept without any visual help here, because that's kind of the strength and the power of music, that it speaks to everyone who comes to the concert. Idealistically, I think so, because you can take a person with 6 classes of education, put them in a classical music hall, and Beethoven will still speak to them in a way, while this piece, however genius and smart it is, will not, just because there is this huge gap in the language. And also he wasn't obviously the last composer who developed the music. So after him, there were much more people who went to even further extremes of the same pattern when they are writing way too smart music, or they're going in the opposite direction of simplifying music and going for minimalistic stuff, something that Philip Glass did and many after him. And sometimes in modern days, while performing pieces written newly for the orchestra, and you know Sophia perfectly well, sometimes sitting in the string section there, you're like, did he just fell asleep on the keyboard or something? Because the notes make no sense. Like at some points, I think some particularly hard parts written for strings in 16th, I think noise ad libitum would be much easier way of notating what he wanted us to play rather than writing those random notes as they are. You know, it would be the same effect. So this is my question, this kind of development towards either too simplified things or too complicated things, which in my opinion sort of make music lose its purpose.
I think I mean, if I can continue on that, I think it's a really interesting discussion, and it's interesting what to who is the music really written for, and that's why I brought up this American guy, because it's there are so many different ideas, but of who it's for and who is right and who is wrong. But I think that for me, it's important that this is where programming becomes important. You can have, I mean, having a very new a piece that is very, let's say intellectual and very I mean, all pieces of music are of course intellectual, but you have one that is very, you know, written in the 60s and have this kind of approach to music, and then you have an old Bach partita or something. I think what is interesting for any audience member is the interaction between these two pieces, and what do they share in common. Like if you contrast one thing with another, then you can form a new kind of idea. And so this is what I believe is the goal for me, at least. Speaking about contemporary music, music is not particularly a sound or a type of writing. It's more of what experience do you give to the audience, and how can you change, or how can you manipulate, or how can you think about the expectations they have on the music. If they see a name they've never seen before, and then they see, you know, Mozart or something, what is happening in between is the important message and the important thing. And then of course there are people who really like this piece by a composer they might not know of, and that's fantastic. Or some of the audience members like the Mozart thing. I remember on the concert we had a piece that was written by Zacharias Wolf that was called Baby, and it's this piece where we had electronics and full ensemble, and it takes its starting point from Justin Bieber's song called Baby, and it kind of fragments everything, and you can hear some line that you remember, and you hear that intro there, and a random voice says baby or whatever. And I remember in the middle of the piece it started really soft and very minimalistic in a way. I heard my grandfather like, I don't understand this. I can't understand this. It was a very fine addition to the piece in a way. But I think that this is when things meet, that's the important thing that a contemporary ensemble can do and contemporary music can do.
Do you have any take on that, Sophia?
I mean, just to add to what you were saying, I think the three of us come together in that we are really interested in finding the like red thread that brings things together. So and how I'm obsessed with programming stuff. I mean, this is like my hobby. I sit down and I write hundreds of programs and try to find a way to do things. It's not like okay, we're going to do a Mozart, we're going to do a Beethoven overture, then we're going to do this female composer because we have to do it for quotas. But actually, I didn't research anything, so I'm just going to ask ChatGPT. I mean, this I see all the time in orchestral programs and chamber music, and I just, you know, if you're going to do it properly, get really deep into the subject. And I think we all have different interests, but we approach them in a similar way. The thing about those like 3 notes that sound kind of like noise, I think it's kind of a joy and a responsibility as a performer, and that's the freeing thing when you play both Baroque, I find, and contemporary music, because I've done a bit of both. Is that when you're outside of a certain tradition and expectation, and you don't have to think about, okay, Leopold Mozart said you have to phrase off the second note, or these specifics. I find that I have this freedom to convey a certain message. It's like you see these, I don't know if it's Stanislavski method or in acting, where you are given nonsense words. You have to say teapot, and you're saying teapot, and you convey something completely different just with your body language and your tone and your expression. And actually, I think that's, for me, my responsibility, that I might be playing something that is scratchy or noise, or just completely actually is a noise, but I have such a huge responsibility to deliver it and create a part of the atmosphere, or say something with it. Because if I go on there and just do what they wrote, which is a noise, I don't understand it, the audience doesn't understand it, the composer feels misunderstood, and we're just doing a complete disservice to the music. A bit like when you program stuff for the sake of it, and you program music by a woman, but you didn't research it, and I could have given you 17 other options of much better music. And I find it frustrating, because the people who were in the room who thought, oh yeah, but women can't write music, these old conservatives, they leave the room with their prejudices confirmed. And I think it's our responsibility, if we take up the task, to actually really try and make people question what they thought. So they walk out and think, oh, but this was a great piece, but I never heard of this Melbonis or Boulanger, or I never thought I would like contemporary music. But actually, because they started off with Hildegard von Bingen and then transitioned to this modern thing, and I saw the similarities between pieces written 500 years apart, and it just, I think we can't be complacent, and I think that's why it's exciting that we have this flexibility and freedom to try and bring that to people.
Yeah, flexibility and freedom is not always there, but I get your point. Sander, how is your take on that? And does Arctic Philharmonic does any modern written stuff?
Yeah, we do a little bit. We actually don't do that much contemporary stuff in the Arctic Phil, but definitely a little bit. And I think yeah, it's a really interesting discussion. And I was just thinking a little bit about what Sophia was saying about your responsibility also as a performer to bring something into this. It's really the same with all kinds of music. You have to bring something to the table. And again, I'm a little bit like just playing what it says in the score. It's the same for all types of music. It won't be that engaging to the wider audience if you don't really put something into it yourself in the performance, in the moment. And I was just a little bit curious, since when you're working with contemporary music and what you're saying there with like if you're making a noise, kind of this bringing an expression into it has a lot to do with improvisation, I think. And I wonder if you do much improvisation in your ensemble, and how like it's this interaction between like written music and contemporary music and improvisation that I think is fascinating, and whether you work with that.
I think it's very interesting, just the relationship between improvisation and finding meaning in music and interpretation. I mean, I've worked in I think there is an approach in ensemble chamber music where it can be very, like, what is a rehearsal? It can be very flexible. And when I played in the Stockholm saxophone quartet, and we find a new piece, it's all about, often the first playthrough is about what does this piece remind us of? What is the familiarity of this piece? And you can find these small triggers in the piece that this reminds me of this, or it's ways to make it comprehensible. I think we haven't done so much improvisation there, and we didn't have time for that in with this project. But I think it would be very interesting to do, and I think it's a way to familiarize yourself with the sounds also, and the way the composer's language also. It's very important that, I mean, this is what I thought about this project, that all composers are trying their best to notate in as clearly as possible their ideas, and no matter what they do, it can always be misinterpreted or interpreted as another thing, or you think of, but this looks like this composer when he writes that, or she writes that. And so it's always that kind of discussion. What is the actual sound? And I think doing improvisation could be a very interesting approach to familiarize yourself.
I was going to say that we were a bit hesitant. We discussed it once. At least Filip and I were saying we were a bit hesitant with improvisation because it feels like, it is really, it's a skill, it's an art to do it. And I would be afraid to delve into this and just, it's modern music, so you can just play any random ad libitum. And actually, there is a way to do it in the same way that, there's a completely different technical approach to playing folk. And it's not just you're playing out of tune. You keep hitting the same microtone the same way each time. It's not just, and I wouldn't feel comfortable just doing this without actually really researching and trying to prepare, because it feels a little bit bullshitty. But I can get away with it. It's modern music. It would have to have the right background to it.
Yeah, I just want to comment a little bit on that, because I've also done quite a bit of improvisation, and I think it's really, really fun. And I think a little bit of the problem with some of the contemporary music, I think, is a little bit like Stefan was also saying, that you're giving this immensely complex piece of music, and it's like classical musicians today are expected to play everything, so many different styles of music. And we know Mozart and Brahms and Beethoven, we know their musical language and everything. And then comes a completely unknown composer, very complex music. And then it's just really, really difficult, and you don't know how it should sound. You're not familiar. And very often, in my experience, they're after certain effects. But they're notating things extremely accurate. And as classical musicians, we get dragged in and trying to play all the notes like we have been taught, and we're forgetting to listen. And often they're after this effect of something that is actually not that difficult to play, because it's just something like that. And you don't need to hit every note. And there's an aspect of improvisation in that, I think. And we did work a little bit with Kristine Kjøgersen in the Arctic Phil, which is a Norwegian composer that I'm really fascinated with, because like Stefan, I have been a little bit skeptic to modern music, and not always, but she writes in a way that she simplifies things, and she has we don't need to go into detail, but she has, for example, something called the bridge clef, where she notates really high pitches, but it's not accurate pitches. It's just it's a movement, it's a structure, it's an effect. And then what happens is that because you're notating in a different way, the classical musicians manage to not be just reading the music, but actually listening to what they're doing and trying to make an interesting sound. And back to what you were also saying, Sophia, about making something out of it. If you notate things too specifically, you actually lose that aspect, because you're using all your focus and energy on trying to play something very, very specific, where actually what you're after is a tiny little sound effect as part of a whole. And I think like I'm also writing a little bit myself, and I just think that the practical side of writing music to write in a way that musicians can actually perform this easily. It's such an important part of being a composer because you have limited time to study and practice. And like I said, when you don't know the musical language, it's like it's so important that you, as quickly as possible, I think, get to a point where you actually play music and you listen and you're concerned with the expression and not just doing everything correctly in a way.
It's very
But
exciting to
so
hear.
it's just the beauty that we you get to collaborate with composers. You know, Zacharias was like calling me and saying, "How do you write this? Where's the harmonic? How do I make this scratch?" And it made my life so much easier and quicker because I got to collaborate with him. I didn't have to sit there and try and work out. He told me and it demonstrated how he wanted it to sound. And so then actually the music suddenly looks like, oh, I can read this map now because I was able to have that communication directly with him, which I wouldn't with some obscure composer from the 60s who's writing quantum physics music.
Yeah, it's very exciting because I can relate to everything you were saying, guys. The thing is, what maybe I was a little bit unclear because, and it comes a little bit from maybe a little bit different perspective on why we do that. Because in my world, kind of, we only do the music because we're going to play it on the concert. And on the concert, then, we have to be thinking about how much of what we are speaking about is understood on the other side. Because I can, if it would be a theater, and I'm coming on a tour to Argentina, and if I speak German there, it's little chance that it will come through, We have to be, if you are doing a concert, then you are, in my imagination, a priori, like interested in being understood. And the question is how much of this stuff composers nowadays often put in, even if it's not with an idea of putting a chaos into music, which I think is wrong by definition, that the music is the opposite of chaos. But it can be different takes on that. And that's what I was curious to hear from you guys. If the idea of the music is the opposite of being chaos, as about bringing some structure into the sound, then it's really little chances that it will be understood by usual people. And I have this very bright kind of life-changing experience for me once we were on this trip to Hammerfest with the students of the Norwegian Academy of Music. I don't know, Sandra, did you have the same trip?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and we talked about with Daniel Tingstad the last seminar we had, and I think he wasn't on that trip. But anyways, they bring the students from Norwegian Academy of Music to Hammerfest, which is a little tiny gas-producing village in the very, very far north of Norway, for a week festival. And the thing is, I think it's a part of the idea. They organize very little, so most of the concerts there are like drop off. Like they just put you on stage play, and people are not coming so very much prepared. So therefore, it's kind of a lot of modern contemporary music there, very minimalistic, one can say. And the fun part about that week is that we are living in the local families. And I remember after one of those concerts where students delivered extremely a lot of modern music. I'm sitting at the table there, and the host is like turning to me and say, "But can you explain me what's the point of that? It's not even smart." And it was like, and at the same time, we were playing some Tchaikovsky trios on that concert. We were the only ones, I think, playing some classical music, which it wasn't the hardest piece, but we did have to invest some time into putting it on, maybe a little bit more than some modern Arve Part reflections piece. But and the feedback we got from him, from the ordinary audience, was like he was so happy. And the point is, if they can't enjoy it, if they can't understand it, what's the point of bringing it? For yourself, it's a very selfish act then. And I do understand that, yeah, if you're not interested yourself in what you're delivering, then there is no point of doing it. But there is a line, I guess. How selfish can we get in choosing what we play and how we play and for who we play?
I think it's an interesting thought, and I've thought about it myself a lot of times. I think we need to remember also that there are a lot of different genres in contemporary music. It's very easy to think of it as being one thing, like we think of the Romantic era, but there are so many different aspects of the Romantic era depending on which city, composer, tradition, and country. And I mean, I'm sure that in some instances, if a person from France in the 1860s would go to Vienna and listen to a concert, would be completely insane or very annoyed by their way of playing, because it's not like they should be played like it's in France or whatever. And so that's very, in that sense, a selfish thing for in the Vienna orchestras to play in their way. And I think this is interesting because it's the same in contemporary music today, that there are a lot of, there's just so many composers and there are so many pieces, and they have all written a lot of pieces, and some of them are doing a lot of orchestra pieces, and some of them are doing only ensemble pieces, and some of them had tried to do orchestra pieces but realized that this is not their way of composing, and then that piece happens to end up winning a competition or being performed in an orchestra. And these things, it's hard to kind of know beforehand what is this piece, and how will it sound, or what will the audience think of it. And I think it's a very hard question, but I think that it's important to remember that in contemporary music there are so many different qualities and so many different ways to compose. I mean, Anders Hillborg has written a piece called Bach Materia, which takes its starting point from old Bach, from the Brandenburg concertos. And I mean, there you can hear there's a lot of Brandenburg concertos they're there. But then there is some other material, and Luciano Berio has written a lot of pieces where, Schubert meets his own way of composing. And I mean, this is still contemporary music, even though Schubert is also in the piece, or Bach is in the piece. And I would say that this is also contemporary music, and that's the interesting thing, that how do we connect the sound of today with the sound of yesterday and the sound of tomorrow? That is the discussion and point of contemporary music, not so much. And then there is always the problems of notating, and that it has to be clear. But that is, the composers are aware of that also. They don't no composer today, I would say, wants to write music that is complicated to perform. Could be complicated to perform, but easy to understand. I think all composers want to be easily understood. It's no point in being misunderstood.
I have some doubts about last statement. I believe that some of the modern composers in some schools, I think they're really encouraged.
Yeah, of course.
Or they feel maybe cool because they're writing something overly complicated.
Yeah, of course. But I think that comes from a tradition from the 60s. Yeah. And that has its history also. It's very interesting about what contemporary music was after the Second World War. They started to write graphic scores, graphical notations, because they didn't want to be connected to what was before the Second World War, because they thought it represented something that they didn't want to be part of. And so it's not the question of, of course they could write like they did, like the traditional way of notating, but there was so much political symbolism in that way of notating, so that it become sufferable to do that. And I think this is, yeah. So I think there's a lot of more politics in the way people notate, rather than, okay, let's do something different because no one else has done it. But then this question of, okay, the composers now who engage with professors from that tradition, that's another discussion. But I think that originally these scores from Lutoslavsky or like after the Second World War. It's a lot of history to that.
My thinking, I totally agree with what you were saying, but I think also maybe the way it developed and how long it was developing this way, that it sort of made the modern samtidsmusik a little bit detached, disconnected from the whole essence, from the performing traditions, from the idea of music itself. Because I mean, when music starts operating and basing itself on the visual patterns, as it was what you just described, that they started notating it in a more visual way, I think it's kind of against the whole idea of music, if you know what, in my opinion.
Haven't we always had the dichotomy of abstract or like programmatic music and Beethoven's Sixth Symphony? You can clearly hear everything representative in it, and then you have one of his other symphonies, which is completely just like pure music, and in that sense, it doesn't have rhetorical meaning like centuries of tradition. And I assume people at the time would have thought, but why is it not representing something? Why can't I hear the cuckoo like I did in his Sixth Symphony? And surely this is just a continuation. It's taking that to the nth degree with this.
I mean, you don't need a score to enjoy Beethoven, right? You sort of need a score to enjoy the last quintet by what's his name?
Schoenberg,
right?
I don't agree. I've listened. I remember listening to his string trio, which he wrote before and after he died. He started writing it and then died halfway through and got his heart restarted and literally brought back to life and then finished it.
Okay.
Oh wow.
That's crazy.
I don't think you need this
context
information to enjoy it, but I listened to it at first without the score, and then I listened to it again with the score, like in performance. I mean, I listened to it live. Maybe if I listened to it on Spotify, I wouldn't have enjoyed or understood it, but something about just the physical act of watching it, and even though the notes themselves didn't make so much sense, the dialogue between fragmented things, and it's like looking at an abstract, for me at least, it feels like looking at an abstract painting or looking at Kandinsky or something that I don't see a recognizable form, but the way they interact with each other and you step back, you get an impression, even if it's not a message.
It would be very interesting to have Daniel Lyngstad here, which we had last time. He is a director for a festival in Oslo called Ultima. Interpulse. Interpulse. And that was sort of a little bit in the same direction, Theo, what you were talking about, that this music just requires a correct placing, a right kind of surroundings. They are doing their concert in Jakobskirke. It's like a very special space in Oslo. It's an old church, which they transformed into like a venue for different concerts, and they specialize in also modern music, but minimalist music, something like Philip Glass. And they put it in the context of like a light show in a church where they serve popcorn, where they often put audiences in weird patterns and do all possible weird things, which kind of put the minimalist music in a context and make it really work, really fun. Like they cooperate with rave DJs, for example, and they did raves in the morning combined with Philip Glass and stuff like that, which I think adds it a little bit of like this, the environment that helps. Maybe a little bit in what you also mentioned, Sophia, with that you need some kind of visual patterns, and they even naturally come to you when you listen to this kind of music. I think it's a lot in that. I think, guys,
I want to, if I can add one more thing, just for the sake of argument. I think it's because I just think this is a very interesting conversation. But what you've been talking about, that you can listen to like Beethoven without the score and enjoy it. I mean, it's certainly true. But I think that coming from a contemporary point of view, it could also be performing Beethoven. I mean, that is also a way of listening without a score, or listening to taking in music by itself. It's a way of listening and that is also something you can, I believe, discuss or do in another context. I mean, there are a lot of things they do St. Matthew Passion with with a stage version. They did that with Simon Rattle and the Berlin Phil, I think, and Peter Sellers, right? And these things, I mean, you can do something with the old music as well, just to make the experience a bit different. And I think that's the goal of contemporary, having a contemporary ensemble or doing contemporary music. It's not necessarily playing strictly new music, but it's also what can we do with how do we present things is the most important thing.
Yeah, and it needs some special presentation, but I guess it's equally true to any music we do. Thank you guys so much. We really should be rounding up this meeting. Unfortunately, it's a very interesting discussion. We should meet again next Saturday with a cup of coffee, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Joining. Really fun. I see you guys soon in life, I hope. Have a good Easter vacation, all of you who celebrate. And thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.